There was a huge fire at Company X, where my husband worked. When I heard the news, I felt like someone had hit me in the head with a hammer. I was so worried about him. I immediately called my husband, hoping he was okay and had gotten out of the fire. The phone rang, and then I heard his voice on the other end. "Hello? Max, where are you? Are you safe?" I asked, relieved to hear from him. My voice got louder because I was so happy to reach him. Max sounded annoyed and said, "Why are you shouting? I'm at work. Don't call me when I'm working." He hung up the phone right after that. I felt a little better knowing he wasn't caught in the fire, but his response seemed strange. "My name is Mona, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a nurse, and work has always been a big part of my life. I married Max 3 years ago when I was 29. We met through a friend and hit it off right away. We live in his company housing and are enjoying our life together. We've been married for 3 years, but don't have kids yet. I still believe we can have a happy family." Max is a good man, though sometimes he can be a bit self-centered. He shows me love, and I feel safe with him. Lately, though, he's been working a lot, even on his days off. I think he's just tired, so he doesn't pay much attention to me. After dinner, he sits on the couch, staring at his phone with the TV on but not really watching it. When I try to talk to him, he just gives short answers like yeah or oh. At first, I thought maybe I had said something wrong, but I decided he was just exhausted from his busy work, so I made sure to prepare healthy meals for him every day. Then, something unusual happened. A coworker asked me to switch my shift from night to day, so I had to tell Max that I would be working during the day. I planned to let him know, but I got busy and ended up sending him an email that day. I told him about the shift change and that I would make dinner and wait for him. But I didn't get a reply. He used to reply quickly, even when I was at work, sometimes with emojis. This time, he just read the message but didn't respond. I started to wonder if he was just busy or if this was normal after being married for 3 years. Feeling a bit sad, I went to the store after work and bought ingredients to cook a nice dinner for him. Since it was so cold, I decided to make a one-pot dish. I prepped everything and waited for him to come home so I could start cooking. He usually gets home by 7 p.m., but by 9 p.m., he still hadn't come back. When he finally walked in, I said, "Welcome back. You're late. Did you work overtime?" He answered, "Yeah, I did, but did you have to switch to the day shift suddenly?" I said, "Yeah, a coworker had an emergency, so I couldn't tell you sooner, but it's a bit frustrating that you didn't know until the same day. I might have made other plans, like going out for a drink." Max apologized. "You're right, sorry." Then I turned on the stove and started cooking. "Oh, you haven't eaten yet?" my husband asked when he saw me sitting at the table. "No, I thought I'd wait for you," I replied. "Well, thanks, but next time, you don't have to wait for me," he said. His words made me feel a little sad. I started to wait for the hot pot to boil. Once it was simmering, I served him a portion, then served myself. I was really hungry after waiting so long. As I ate, I noticed that my husband wasn't eating much. "What's wrong? You don't seem to be eating much," I asked. He looked a little confused and replied, "Oh, yeah, actually, I worked late, and a junior colleague bought me a rice bowl, so I'm not really hungry." I was frustrated and said, "Well, you should have told me earlier, before I made the hot pot." He seemed to notice that I was upset and said, "Okay, I'll put my portion in the fridge. I'll eat it tomorrow morning." He was trying to make me feel better. Then, he lay down on the couch, but a few minutes later, he suddenly said, "I'm going for a walk." "That's unusual," I said, surprised. "I haven't been getting enough exercise lately, and I've been working late. I need a change of pace," he explained. I felt a bit empty eating alone at the table, so I decided to put my portion in the fridge too. I felt like I'd eaten too much, and since my husband and I hadn't spent much time together lately, I thought I'd join him on the walk. But when I asked him to walk with me, he refused. He said it wouldn't be good for me to walk right after eating, and that he wanted to go for a long walk alone. He left to walk by himself. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I decided to secretly follow him. As soon as I did, I saw my husband walking briskly, clearly not tired from his walk. He stopped in front of a park that was a bit far from the house and started looking around. It seemed like he was talking to someone on his phone. Then, a car pulled up. My husband went up to the car and spoke to the person in the driver's seat. It was dark, but when I got closer, I saw a woman sitting there. She had long, curly hair and glossy lipstick. I was in shock as I watched my husband get into the car with her. They drove away together. I couldn't believe it. He was having an affair. I stood there, shocked, for a while. Then my husband sent me a text message saying he had run into someone he knew and would be home a little late. Someone he knew, out of nowhere, I thought. I didn't believe him at all. He had told me he wasn't hungry because he'd already eaten, but it was past 2 a.m. when he finally came home. He didn't even notice I was awake. He seemed a bit drunk and went straight to the kitchen to drink some water. From then on, he kept working overtime whenever I was on the day shift. We already had trouble matching our days off, but now it was even harder. Yesterday, he worked late, and today, he had to work on his day off, but I wondered if it was really work. Was he meeting the woman I saw that night? I couldn't stop thinking about it. I searched online for detective agencies and ended up hiring one to look into it. I felt guilty for spying on him, but if nothing was going on, I would be able to trust him again, so I decided to go ahead with the investigation. The waiting was awful. My husband was as quiet as ever, and every time I saw his face, I thought about the woman. I wanted to know the truth as soon as possible. Then something unbelievable happened. It was Saturday, and I was working my usual day shift. My husband was also working on his day off. I focused on my work, trying not to think about anything else. Suddenly, I heard fire truck sirens getting louder and closer. It wasn't just one truck, but several. There must have been a big fire nearby. I felt uneasy. Then, two of my coworkers came back from a hospital room with serious expressions. They mentioned the fire. Wait, the fire? I asked. Yes, it was a big fire at Company X, they said. My heart dropped. That was where my husband worked. I rushed to explain what I had heard, then called my husband to make sure he was safe. Please be safe, I thought to myself as I dialed his number. Even though we hadn't been talking much lately, I always saw him off when he left for work. I hoped he had gotten out of the fire. The phone rang, and to my relief, I heard his voice. Hello? Max, where are you? Are you safe? I asked, my voice louder from relief. He sounded annoyed and said, What's wrong with you? You're yelling. I'm at work. Don't call me while I'm working. And the call ended suddenly. At least he wasn't caught in the fire, but his response was strange. There was a fire, and fire trucks were there. He couldn't possibly still be at work. Maybe he wasn't even at work. And why was he being so cold to me when I was worried about him? I became angrier. Maybe I had been seeing him off just so he could meet another woman since we got married. I made a decision. I would leave. I started packing my things as soon as I got home. Then I checked the mailbox and saw the results from the detective agency. I decided to leave with those results in hand. My parents helped me pack, and the movers arrived soon after. My things were taken out of the house right away. My husband didn't know I knew the truth. He didn't try to contact me that night, and I figured he was staying with his lover. I packed up many of my belongings from before our marriage. The room was almost empty, looking so lonely. As I stared at it, I realized I had no attachment to the life we had in this house. For now, I moved my things to my parents' house and started looking for a new place to live alone. The next day, my husband finally called. Hey, what's going on? Most of your stuff is gone, he said. Of course I moved out, I answered. What were you thinking? When are you coming back? What about my food? What about the house chores? I was shocked. Is that all you care about? As I talked to him, I remembered the fire at his company. He wasn't even working, he was with his affair partner. That thought made me even angrier. Why don't you get another woman to do that, huh? I asked him. What are you talking about? He replied. You were with a woman named Linda today, weren't you? Huh? What are you talking about? I was working at the office. At the office? How long did you work today? It was a busy day, even though it was my day off. I worked late. That's why I was surprised you moved out. Stop lying already. Huh? You lied about going to work, right? I wasn't lying, I was working. How could you be working all day when there was a fire at your office? Huh? When I called you, I heard fire trucks heading to your company because of a fire there. That's why I called, to check if you were okay. You told me not to call you at work, but you spoke like nothing happened. Well, and I have proof of your affair from a detective agency. You can't hide from this. I'll be handling everything through my lawyer. I'll make sure to get alimony. Oh no. He begged for my forgiveness, apologizing over and over, but I didn't care anymore. I had no feelings left for him. I'm sorry, but it's over. I'm hanging up now. Wait. I went to my lawyer and filed for a divorce and alimony. The divorce went through, and my husband couldn't avoid the consequences with all the evidence. He and his affair partner paid me a fair amount of alimony. It turned out his lover was a junior colleague at his company. The news of their affair spread quickly, especially since it happened during the fire. It caused a lot of anger from their coworkers. Now, both my husband and his lover are getting cold stares from everyone, and I think they deserve it. Meanwhile, I moved into a new apartment and am living a peaceful life on my own. As a nurse with a stable job, I'm not in a rush to start another relationship. I'm enjoying my own time and looking forward to meeting someone who's sincere when the time is right. She discovered her husband's affair because of the fire at his company, but he shouldn't have cheated in the first place. She would have found out eventually. He deserves everything that happened. Enjoy your life, Mona, and stay strong as you start fresh.
Hello, my name is Kelly. Ever since I was a child, I dreamed of becoming a journalist or working in magazine publishing. My passion for writing and staying on top of trends naturally led me to pursue a degree in journalism and media. During college, I immersed myself in the world of storytelling, and upon graduation, I started working for several companies. While none were particularly well known, I took pride in knowing I was living out my dream. Around the time I turned 30, I met Matthew, my future husband. Matthew came from a wealthy family that ran a successful business. And while this seemed like a minor detail at first, it turned out to be a significant factor in my life. His mother, Grace, never approved of me. She made it clear from the beginning that she didn't consider me a suitable match for her son, often criticizing my career in journalism and belittling my academic background. Grace's negative attitude was hurtful at first. It's difficult to feel constantly undermined, especially by someone who should welcome you into the family. For reasons only she could understand, Grace thought it was acceptable to treat me poorly. Thankfully, Matthew always stood by me, defending me against her harsh words. His father, Larry, was also on my side, stating up for me whenever Grace crossed the line. Over time, I grew more resilient to her jabs. Matthew even suggested we distance ourselves from her, but I disagreed. Matthew worked closely with his father in the family business, and distancing ourselves from Grace could have made things uncomfortable for Larry, who was nothing but kind. I didn't want to be the cause of tension in their family, nor did I want Matthew to sever ties with his mother. I learned to be patient, recognizing that maintaining family relationships often involves navigating complex emotions and difficult circumstances. We limited our interactions with Grace to a few times a month, but that dynamic shifted when Larry had to travel overseas for business. Grace, not wanting to be alone, moved in with us until his return. I was hesitant about the arrangement but believed that family should come first. Living with Grace, however, was far more challenging than I anticipated. She found fault in almost everything I did, and her criticisms seemed relentless. Still, I managed to maintain my composure, reminding myself that as long as her words caused no actual harm, I could endure her presence. But my patience was truly tested during a particularly stressful week at work. I was leading a major redesign for a section of our magazine, an important project that could lead to a promotion. The pressure was immense, and Grace, oblivious to the weight of my responsibilities, seemed indifferent to the stress I was under. The night before my big presentation, I was discussing my anxieties with Matthew when Grace overheard us. She waltzed into the living room and decided to offer her unsolicited opinion. "Well, Kelly," she began, "I overheard your conversation, and honestly, you probably don't have the skills for this. You'll likely do poorly tomorrow." Her words were cold, and she followed up with, "Maybe it's time to quit and focus on being a housewife." Her comment stung deeply, not just because of the lack of support, but because it revealed her complete disregard for my professional aspirations. I tried to brush it off, but then she added, "I can't believe he married a journalist." Her tone was dripping with scorn, as if my career and everything I worked for were worthless in her eyes. Frustrated, I finally stood up for myself. "Grace, you're overstepping. I don't have time for this right now. I have more important things to focus on than your opinion of me." She looked stunned by my boldness. "How did you speak to me like that?" she shot back, turning to Matthew. "Say something. Your wife is disrespecting your mother." But Matthew stayed calm, siding with me. "Mom, she's just defending herself. There's nothing wrong with that." Grace, clearly offended, accused me of turning Matthew against his family. Look how easily you've turned him against us, she spat. You'll regret this, Kelly. Her intrusion into our private conversation and her blatant disrespect left me simmering with anger, but I chose not to let it consume me. Matthew tried to apologize on her behalf, but I stopped him. It wasn't his burden to bear. After that heated exchange, we decided to call it a night. My mind was too occupied with my presentation to dwell on Grace's threats, but the tension lingered. The next morning, I focused on what truly mattered: my career and the opportunity ahead. I arrived at work early, eager and prepared for my presentation. But when I opened my laptop, I was met with a heart-stopping discovery. All the files on my desktop were gone. It was as if my laptop had been completely reset. Panic surged through me as I frantically checked my email, hoping the backups I'd sent would save me. But to my horror, even my inbox and trash had been wiped clean. Overwhelmed and fighting back tears, I approached my boss to explain the situation. His reaction was anything but understanding. He reprimanded me harshly, his voice sharp with frustration, and then coldly told me to forget the presentation altogether. The weight of his words hit me hard. As if that wasn't enough, I soon found out that my boss had a backup presenter lined up just in case I failed. In that moment, it became painfully clear that my chances for advancement at the company were slim. Devastated by the turn of events, I left the office in tears, my heart heavy with disappointment. When I got home, Matthew was still there. The moment he saw me, his expression changed, and without hesitation, he decided to take the day off to be with me. He pulled me into his arms as I cried, the stress and heartbreak of the morning overwhelming me. Once I had calmed down a little, he gently asked, "What happened, honey? Didn't the presentation go well?" "There was no presentation," I replied, my voice shaky. "At least not by me." Matthew looked at me, confused. "What do you mean? You've been working so hard on this for days. You barely slept." I took a deep breath, still struggling with the shock of it all. When I got to work and opened my laptop, everything was gone. All the files were deleted. His brows furrowed in disbelief. "How is that even possible?" "It's embarrassing," I admitted, the memory still fresh and stinging. I had to explain the whole thing to my boss. I'd backed everything up by emailing it to myself, but even my inbox and trash had been completely emptied. Matthew's face softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry this happened. What did your boss say?" I sighed, the words still heavy on my chest. He was furious. He called me unprofessional and lazy. And the worst part, he had someone else ready to give the presentation. The bitterness in my voice was hard to hide. "But you still have your job, right?" Matthew tried to find a silver lining. "Yes, but I'm stuck. There's no room for me to advance or move up. I'm done here," I said, defeated. "Don't worry, honey. You'll find a better job. I'll be here for you through it all. Just keep working there until you're ready to leave," he reassured me, his support unwavering. "Yeah, I'll give my notice soon. I can't believe I worked so hard for this, and just when I was so close, it all slipped away," I said, the realization sinking in. The whole incident had left me shaken. I'd always taken pride in my work, and to have a project unravel so disastrously felt traumatic. Though I stayed on for another week, my heart wasn't in it anymore. When I finally submitted my resignation, I was counting down the days until I could walk away. Throughout this ordeal, Grace's reaction was strangely gleeful. She caught me in tears one day and instead of offering comfort, made snide remarks, gloating over my misfortune. At first, her words fueled my anger. But then I realized that her satisfaction in my struggles was just a reflection of her own bitterness. As I reflected on Grace's behavior, an unsettling thought crossed my mind. What if her delight wasn't just about me leaving my job? What if she had actually been involved in the disaster? The suspicion gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace might have sabotaged my laptop. The idea that she could have played a role in the ruin of my career haunted me. Before bringing such a serious accusation to Matthew, I knew I needed concrete proof. Determined to uncover the truth, I devised a plan to monitor her discreetly. I purchased a hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector and installed it in my home office. I sensed the device with my phone, setting everything up to capture any suspicious activity. The next part of my plan was to bait Grace into revealing her possible involvement. I made it a point to appear visibly stressed and anxious whenever I was in the office, hoping it would draw her attention. Matthew was still at work, completely unaware of the unfolding drama. As expected, Grace took notice of my anxious pacing. "What's wrong? Are you stressed about another project?" she prodded, her tone dripping with false concern. Taking a deep breath, I decided to play into her curiosity. Yeah, it's just been really tough lately, I confided, setting the trap. I've been given another chance to present my work. It could lead to a raise, I shared, trying to mask my anxiety with a glimmer of hope. Grace's interest was immediately piqued, her tone dripping with both surprise and skepticism. Oh, really? Yes, I continued, but I'm nervous. This is my last chance to get it right, and I have to do well. I watched her reaction carefully, hoping to catch a hint of her true intentions. Why aren't you telling Matthew? Are you embarrassed about your job? She asked, her words sharp. It's not that. I sighed. I just don't want to disappoint him again. Please, let's keep this between us, okay? I pleaded, trying to gauge her response. Grace shrugged, her reply chilling. I'm not promising anything, but it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. Frustrated, I couldn't hold back. Why do you always want me to fail? I confronted her. Grace scoffed. I just think you'd be better off as a housewife. It's less embarrassing than what you're doing now. Her words stung, and I felt my patience thin. I don't have time for this, and I don't care what you think. Please just leave me alone so I can practice before Matthew gets home. With that, Grace finally left, but her unsettling smirk lingered in my mind long after she was gone. I stayed in the office a little while longer, processing everything before leaving to join Matthew when he got home. Throughout dinner, I couldn't shake the unease that her occasional smirks brought. Each one sent a ripple of anxiety through me, heightening my suspicion. Later that night, after Matthew and I had settled into our usual routine of watching a few episodes of our favorite show, I decided it was time to check the footage from the hidden camera in my office. As we watched, the screen showed nothing unusual until around midnight. That's when Grace stealthily entered the office. My heart raced as I hastily showed Matthew the live feed on my phone. At first, he was puzzled, but soon disbelief crossed his face as Grace tampered with my laptop, causing it to shut off and restart. Matthew's expression shifted from shock to anger as he realized what was happening. Meanwhile, the camera showed Grace rifling through my files. Unable to contain his frustration, Matthew stormed into the office, his footsteps heavy with fury. He burst through the door, startling Grace, who spun around, caught in the act. "What are you doing in here, Ma?" Matthew demanded, his voice strained as he tried to maintain his composure. "Oh, nothing really," Grace replied, feigning nonchalance. "Then why is Kelly's laptop open? Are you accusing me of going through her stuff?" Matthew pressed, his voice rising with suspicion. "I think you did more than just go through her laptop, Mom. Did you come here to tidy up at midnight? You know Kelly would never leave her laptop open like that," Matthew retorted, his frustration clear. "Don't talk to me like that. I'm still your mother," Grace snapped defensively. "Yeah, my mother who seems to enjoy hurting and sabotaging my wife," Matthew shot back, his voice unwavering. "We caught you on camera resetting Kelly's laptop. You were spying on me? That's disgusting. How could you film me without my consent?" Grace exclaimed, her indignation rising. "I didn't put cameras in your room," I interjected, stepping beside Matthew. "I installed one in my office. You went in there without permission." The confrontation had brought to light the extent of Grace's interference, and it was a defining moment for all of us, a test of both loyalty and trust. Despite her wrongdoing, Matthew stood firm in his decision. "Even if we did film you, it's nothing compared to what you've done to Kelly. I want you out of our house tomorrow," he declared resolutely. Grace's voice wavered with desperation. "But I'll be all alone." "I don't care, Mom. I don't want to talk to you right now," Matthew replied, his mind made up. The next morning, Grace attempted to stall her departure by making breakfast and washing dishes, hoping to buy more time. But Matthew wasn't swayed. As soon as she finished, he came downstairs with her bags already packed. "Your Uber's on its way," he informed her. Grace pleaded tearfully, a rare display of vulnerability from someone who typically brought others to tears. But Matthew, unmoved, retreated to our room, leaving me to face her alone. "You set me up," Grace lashed out, her voice trembling with accusation. I met her gaze calmly, though my words were firm. "If anyone should be yelling, it's me. You're lucky I haven't shared the footage with your friends and family. If they knew what you did, you'd lose them all." My words silenced her. After Grace's departure, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though my job situation still weighed heavily on my mind. However, with Matthew's support, I knew I'd find my way forward. Once my notice period ended, I took some time off to rest and recalibrate. In the months that followed, I enrolled in specialized courses related to my field, honing in on a niche that could give me the edge I needed. My decision not to expose Grace was driven by a desire to rise above her pettiness and prove my capabilities on my own terms. With Matthew's family connections, I secured several promising recommendations, and with his unwavering support, I found the breakthrough I'd been hoping for. I was offered the role of chief editor at a globally recognized magazine. The work was demanding but incredibly fulfilling. As I threw myself into my new role, the need to prove myself to Grace faded into the background. In fact, during those transformative months, we had no contact with her at all. My journey to becoming chief editor wasn't just a professional victory, it was a personal liberation. I no longer needed to validate my worth to someone who had doubted me. Matthew, meanwhile, continued to maintain a professional relationship with his father, Larry, though we heard little about Grace. Larry hinted that she still harbored some resentment, but he kept the details to himself. Despite knowing that Grace hadn't completely let go of her bitterness, I was content. I had risen above her schemes, and I felt stronger for it. Yet deep down, I knew a confrontation with her was inevitable, especially given the unresolved tension that lingered in the background. When I found out that both Grace and Larry were attending a significant company event I'd be at, I braced myself. The party was a grand affair with prominent figures from various industries in attendance. Matthew and I made sure to look our best, fully aware of our own growing influence. As we arrived, we spotted Larry and Grace waving us over. We approached them, exchanging pleasantries, though Grace's eyes raked over me with a critical smirk. "Look at you, trying to fit in," she sneered. Ignoring her, Larry chimed in warmly, "Kelly, you look lovely as always." "Thanks, Larry. How have you been?" I asked, steering the conversation away from Grace's pettiness. "Yeah, how's unemployment treating you?" Grace cut in sharply. "Wait, you're unemployed?" Larry asked, genuinely surprised. "Oh, yes, she messed up at her job, and they let her go. I've always said she's not good enough for our son. Look at her, she can't even keep a job." Grace mocked, her grin malicious. "That's enough, Mom," Matthew intervened, his tone firm. "Stop siding with her. It's bad enough having to see her everywhere. We wouldn't have to if you just left her, like I said," Grace insisted stubbornly. "All right, that's enough. Either you stop talking or I'm leaving," Matthew warned, his patience wearing thin. Larry, trying to ease the tension, smiled at me. "Kelly, sweetie, if you need a job, let me know. It would be great to work with you." "That's kind of you, Larry, but I'll have to pass," I replied graciously, though I appreciated his offer. Grace muttered under her breath, "Of course not. I told you she's lazy and incompetent." Just then, my name echoed through the room, followed by a wave of cheers. I turned to see the CEO motioning for me to come up to the small stage. Excusing myself, I left Grace and Larry behind, with Larry amused and Grace for once speechless. As I stepped onto the stage, the CEO began praising my contributions to the company, particularly my innovative ideas for the magazine. The room filled with applause, and I was soon invited to give a speech. Standing there, I thanked Matthew for his unwavering support and acknowledged the efforts of my colleagues, whose collaboration had been invaluable. I also subtly alluded to an unnamed critic whose skepticism had fueled my determination to excel. When I stepped off the stage, I was met with congratulations from various guests, many of whom were curious about the mysterious critic. I smiled but kept that detail to myself. Returning to our table, Matthew greeted me with a proud embrace, and Larry offered his congratulations with a warm hug. Grace, however, could only manage a cold, disdainful glare. "Oh, Kelly, this is incredible. Now I see why you wouldn't want to work with us," Larry remarked, genuine admiration in his voice. "Thanks, Larry. Honestly, if you'd offered me a job 8 months ago, I might have taken it," I admitted, reflecting on how far I had come. "You should have. At least then you'd be paid more," Grace interjected sharply, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Paid more? I couldn't put a price on this," Larry countered, defending the intangible rewards of my current position. "Right, like she's worth that kind of money," Grace scoffed dismissively. "No, Grace, I mean I couldn't match what she's making right now," Larry clarified, hinting at my substantial earnings. Grace's face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean?" Larry turned to me, asking for permission. "Do you want me to tell her, Kelly? It might sound like boasting if I do." With a nod, I allowed him to reveal the truth. Kelly makes at least 6 times more than I do in her current role, Larry said, his words leaving Grace visibly stunned. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She must be making way more than Matthew or I could have imagined, Grace muttered, her tone shifting from disbelief to reluctant acknowledgement. That can't be right. You must be mistaken, she insisted, still struggling to grasp the reality. He's not mistaken, Mom, Matthew interjected calmly. And I meant it when I thanked you. Your constant criticism only pushed me to support Kelly even more. Seeing her success probably stings, doesn't it? Grace's eyes narrowed, her anger barely concealed. I smiled politely. Anyway, Matthew and I have other people to speak with. Grace, Larry, feel free to join us later, I said, making it clear we were moving on. Larry chuckled, raising his glass in a small toast to me as Matthew and I walked away. I felt more alive than ever, validated, triumphant, and grateful for Matthew's unwavering support through it all.
One day at the hospital where I am employed, I unexpectedly crossed paths with Jessica, a friend of my mom. With a surprised tone, she questioned my presence, stating that I seemed completely out of place. She warned me that if I came seeking a job, I wouldn't find one, instructing me to go back home. Jessica's unexpected comment left the surrounding doctors in a state of frozen uncertainty. I couldn't fathom what she was implying, hoping it wouldn't escalate into a serious matter that might already be too late to rectify. It appeared Jessica hadn't grasped that making an enemy out of me wasn't wise. However, silence was no longer an option. Addressing Jessica directly, I couldn't help but wonder if she was fearless or simply clueless. With a perplexed look, as if she didn't comprehend the meaning at all, she responded, "Huh. What are you talking about? Let me introduce myself. I am Emily, a 35-year-old mother with an active 7-year-old daughter and a mischievous 1-year-old son. My husband, John, is 2 years younger than me and works diligently as a nurse at the General Hospital, caring for patients. I had a job too, but after the birth of our second son, I am currently enjoying maternity leave. Our family recently moved from a cramped 2-bedroom apartment to a second-hand house, bought with a loan. Despite its age, the house has a charming appeal, with a spacious garden for the kids and a soothing view from the rooftop balcony. There's also a lush park nearby where our family spends weekends, turning it into our weekend paradise. The story of Jessica and me began when our daughters, of the same age, started playing together in the park. Jessica, a surgeon at the same hospital where John works, wore designer clothes, and her daughter followed suit in renowned brands. Excited by the coincidence, she expressed a desire to meet my husband, leading to a planned tea gathering at our house. However, upon Jessica's arrival, she displayed blatant rudeness, appraising our belongings and questioning the history of our house. Her impertinent remarks continued during tea, questioning John's choice of being a nurse and suggesting financial instability. Each word cut deep, leaving us at a loss for words. After she left, I apologized sincerely to John for the uncomfortable experience. Concerned, I contemplated keeping some distance from Jessica in the future. John reassured me with a warm smile, suggesting that while it's good to make connections with neighborhood moms, it might be best not to get too involved with Jessica. As time passed, our family experienced new changes. After giving birth to our second son and celebrating his first birthday, I contemplated returning to work. With John's parents providing support with the kids, I found myself with some spare time at the hospital where my husband works, enjoying a hot coffee at the hospital cafe. I'd heard a familiar voice from behind. It was Jessica. "Oh my, isn't that Emily? It's been such a long time." "Hello, Jessica. How have you been?" "Good. What brings you here today? Are you here to see John?" I inquired. "Yes, just some errands. Maybe a job interview or something. It must be tough on just John's income, right?" Her words dripped with sarcasm, and she grinned smugly. Wanting to avoid a troublesome conversation, I responded lightly, "Well, something like that." However, Jessica continued probing with a searching gaze. "This hospital has various stores, right? So where are you working part-time? At the convenience store? Or maybe the restaurant?" After a brief silence, I curtly replied, "Sorry, it's about time for my appointment." I left the cave quickly, moving swiftly through the hospital. I took the elevator to the top floor, heading to the director's office for an important job consultation. After about an hour of discussion, I made my way to the large auditorium of the university for my next appointment. There was an important announcement from the director scheduled that afternoon, with all the hospital staff gathered. On the way to the auditorium, I ran into John. "Oh, John, that's great. After the director's talk, let's go for lunch together," I suggested. "Sounds good. It's a bit of a walk, but how about pasta?" he offered with a smile. "The pasta place behind the hospital sounds good. I haven't been there in a long time. I'm actually looking forward to it." I agree happily. Lunch with my husband at the hospital was a rare treat. In the hallway to the auditorium, I ran into several doctors, engaging in brief conversations while exchanging greetings. John moved ahead quickly, and I followed at a leisurely pace toward the passageway leading to the auditorium. Along the way, I happened to meet some colleague doctors. "Emily, it's really been a while, and I heard you had a child. Congratulations from the bottom of my heart." Warm words of congratulations were exchanged. Another doctor joined in. "Emily, you were such a big help here. We've been in quite a stir since you left," he said with a laugh, hinting at the struggles. Then, another one asked with interest, "Is your return imminent?" Despite such inquiries, the reunion was comforting, filled with nostalgia and relief to see my colleagues well. But the atmosphere quickly changed. Jessica suddenly appeared and asked curiously, "Emily, why are you here? Are you heading to the auditorium by any chance?" "Yes, that's right. I have some business," I responded modestly yet clearly due to the presence of several colleagues. But Jessica's questions only grew. "But the gathering is only for doctors and nurses, right? Why would a part-timer be here?" she asked, not hiding her skepticism. Her remark brought silence to the corridor, a silence that seemed indicative. "A part-time lady like her?" a doctor muttered. "Is she okay, I wonder?" Another doctor murmured worriedly, not wanting to be involved in unnecessary commotion. I tried to weather Jessica's words. However, it seemed to only incite Jessica. "Why are you ignoring me? It's like you don't think at all," Jessica exclaimed with a sneer. "Lost your way? The auditorium isn't this way. If you're looking for part-time work, go the other direction." "Now please leave," she commanded, looking down on me. The doctors present were appalled by Jessica's behavior, but sympathetically, they began to stand by me, attempting to defuse the situation. The surrounding doctors raised their voices in unison against Jessica. Disappointment and anger were evident on their faces, and their voices contained a strong sense of rejection toward Jessica's actions. "Hold on, you! What kind of way is that to speak to Emily? Don't you have any manners? Apologize to her right now," they demanded, not just disapproving but reproaching Jessica's conduct. The doctors gathered, looking tense, and confronted Jessica, the atmosphere charged with tension. Jessica, faced with a united front against her, appeared confused and at a loss for words. What's going on? I just pointed out that she doesn't belong here. The meeting is only for relevant personnel, and she doesn't fit the bill, right?" She tried to justify her stance, but my patience had reached its limit. With a composed tone, but with content sharp as a blade, I addressed Jessica. "Jessica, you really are brave, aren't you? Or is it that you simply can't read the room?" I critiqued calmly. Unable to find a rebuttal, she stared back at me, perplexed. "Huh? What'd you just say?" I calmly made my position clear. "You'll understand soon enough. The actions you took against me and your careless remarks, the serious consequences they could bring." The doctors present showed no sympathy for Jessica. Look, your future is now utterly uncertain, they said cuttingly. You might want to start looking for another job while you still can. They nodded earnestly to each other. Clearly cornered, Jessica was still unable to hide her panic and anger. So why on earth are all of you defending this non-regular employee so much? I don't understand why you rate her so highly, she raised her voice. The conversation among the doctors echoed in the hallway. Are you the new surgical specialist? One doctor inquired. So that's why you don't know Emily? That's quite pitiful, while another added, Jessica, with anger on her face and indignation in her tone, retorted, Can you explain what you mean by that? Her anger stemmed from the belief that judging people by their professional standing, regardless of their duties as a doctor, was against human dignity. The fact that someone with such values was in our workplace was deeply shocking to me, and I couldn't help but feel distrustful. Jessica seemed unaware, but in fact, I was the very person she should respect the most. The other doctors completely ignored Jessica's questions and left her with cold stares, quietly leaving the scene. Then, I stated calmly, Well, Jessica, we can talk more about this later. You may find my husband's position as a nurse pitiable, but no matter how hard you try, you can never be like John. Besides, the fact that you find meaning in competing shows a great misunderstanding on your part. Jessica became flustered. Wait a minute. Who on earth are you? You're not just a part-timer, are you? She raised her voice. I smiled secretly and replied, As I've already said, you'll come to understand shortly. And with that, I hurried off toward the auditorium. As I entered the auditorium, a large number of doctors had already gathered, and the director stood in front of the screen. Thank you all for gathering here during your busy schedules. Today, I would like to discuss the future direction of our hospital. He began and then proceeded to make an important announcement. Seeing John in the crowd, he approached me and whispered, Emily, good timing. I happened to overhear a bit earlier. Was there some trouble with Jessica? Yes, she did point out something minor, but it's not a big deal, I replied. Interestingly, it seems she has misunderstood me for a part-time worker at this hospital, I replied. John looked incredulous and responded, No way, Emily, as a part-timer? We couldn't help but suppress our laughter at the absurdity of the situation. Amidst this, the director concluded the explanation of the annual business plan and moved on to a significant personnel announcement. As you all know, our hospital is well-staffed with an adequate number of doctors and nurses. To further improve the quality of our medical services, we plan to actively implement overseas training programs. The first training is scheduled in 2 months, and we will select 5 doctors and 5 nurses for it, he declared. This announcement was met with cheers from the attending doctors, and everyone was excited about the prospect. Overseas training meant an excellent opportunity to learn about the latest medical practices in the world. Since it was the hospital's first initiative of its kind since its establishment, everyone's eyes sparkled with the news. The director continued solemnly, yet with an undertone of expectation. Now let's proceed with announcing the names of the rest who have been selected. As he spoke, a silence of mixed tension and anticipation fell, and the names of the chosen 10 were called out one by one. Although John's name was not called this time, his expression did not show disappointment. He quietly watched with a sense of celebration as each selected individual stepped forward. Addressing the 10 lined up on stage, the director asked, Are all of you ready in spirit for the training? Please share a word about your enthusiasm and determination. He gently encouraged them. Each gave a brief, resolute speech, reaffirming their strong intentions. After everyone had spoken, it was finally Jessica's turn. With proper decorum, yet confidently, she said, I am truly grateful for this valuable opportunity for training. I aim to contribute to the further progress of our hospital with the cutting-edge medical techniques I will learn abroad, she said with a polished greeting. Afterward, she turned slowly towards where we were seated and continued with her unique assertive tone. However, this hospital has inexperienced nurses who continue to fail the national exam and impudent individuals who attempt to attend medical conferences despite being non-regular staff. I intend to improve and transform all these aspects. Jessica's provocative declaration changed the atmosphere of the venue, and the looks directed at her turned icy. Her words highlighted the hospital's tensions and how dangerous youthful overconfidence can be, especially the director's sharp gaze seemed to freeze the room, adding significant weight to the situation. The director, maintaining his composure, asked, "Jessica, that was about those two sitting there, wasn't it?" His smile was calm yet did not reach his eyes. "You said there were unsuitable people mingled in here, right?" Confidently nodding, she answered, "Yes, exactly. There are those unfit for this noble assembly," she answered with conviction, remaining composed. The director responded, "Street Emily, could you come forward, please?" With this unexpected invitation, I, who had been merely an observer, suddenly found myself at the center of attention. Confused and starting to lose her confidence, Jessica questioned, "Why? Why are you calling her name?" She struggled to grasp the situation, and the director, showing disappointment towards Jessica, said with a quiet voice, "Jessica, I am disappointed in you. Emily, please introduce yourself to everyone." Taking a deep breath, I recounted the beginning of my career, important milestones, and my temporary step back to become a mother. I continued, "Hello, everyone. It's been a while. I am Emily, the chief of the medical department. I apologize for any inconvenience my maternity leave may have caused, but I will be resuming my duties next month. I look forward to working with you all again." Jessica's voice couldn't hide her surprise. "Wait, she's the chief of the medical department?" Her eyes searched the room for confirmation. Indeed, as the head of the medical team, I had taken a 2-year parental leave to birth and raise my first son. The director, affirming the truth, added quietly, "By the way, Emily is my daughter." His words resonated in the room with undeniable clarity, defining the reality of the situation. Jessica's expression went from confusion to shock, her mouth agape as if to object to the reality, but no words came out. The room, filled with hospital staff, could not contain its reaction, and suppressed laughter spilled out at the unexpected turn of events. The director began speaking in a relaxed tone, "Jessica, for this upcoming overseas training, you have been assigned to be the team leader. Your deployment will be in a conflict zone in the Middle East. There is a shortage of both medication and medical equipment, and a very challenging situation is anticipated. It will be interesting to see if your abilities will be fully utilized, but don't worry, Emily will be there to support you. Learn as much as you can under her guidance." Proudly, Jessica responded with dignity, "I am a doctor too. Although I have no experience working abroad, my clinical skills and treatment records are first class. I will not allow myself to be underestimated." I replied to Jessica with a calm but firm voice. "Let me make one thing clear, Jessica. In the near future, I am going to take over the directorship of this hospital from my father. Do you understand the weight of this fact?" Jessica's expression stiffened, and seeing this, I continued, "Yes, it seems you understand. Well, depending on my decision, your future in this hospital may be affected." Jessica could no longer hide her agitation, and I calmly added, "I haven't heard such a thing." Jan intervened, calmly adding his words, "Jessica, we had not informed you about that matter beforehand. Your disrespectful attitude towards Emily may well be something you deeply regret in the future." Towards the end of the meeting, the director stated firmly, "Please, everyone, a bit of silence. Jessica, in the discussions here, in the end, results are everything. No matter how excellent you may be, that is just one aspect. What's important is the results you can achieve in this hospital, and on that front, I have great expectations of you." Jessica fell silent at the director's words, bowed her head, and nodded without saying anything. The director concluded with that, today's meeting is adjourned." As his words ended, everyone in the auditorium stood up and returned to their respective places. Stepping out of the director's office leisurely, I casually said, "Shall we go for lunch? I've got a craving for pasta today." Side by side with John, I started walking towards our favorite pasta place in the backyard. leaving the hospital building behind. As we were about to pass the small smoking area set up behind the hospital, I spotted Jessica, who appeared to be deep in thought, taking a drag of her cigarette. The moment our eyes met, Jessica awkwardly looked away. At that instant, a sudden event caught our attention. A loud crash sounded, and right before our eyes, a car had rear-ended another in an accident. Jen and I sprang into action immediately. The area was nearly deserted, so it was crucial for us to move quickly to help. "Are you okay?" John called out with concern and quickly checked on the people involved in the accident. One was the driver in the car that was hit, and the other was a pedestrian who happened to be walking by. Jessica also rushed to the accident scene, following us, but seemed overwhelmed by the chaos. Acting on her medical instincts, I began to give directions. "John, quickly get that man into a safe position and check his pulse." Jen moved promptly, following my instructions and beginning his actions. As an emergency nurse, John had been granted special opportunities to accumulate frontline medical experience, including attending surgeries conducted by me. I had trained him rigorously, and he had developed exceptional practical skills. I then directed Jessica with calm and clarity. "Jessica, check if that elderly person is bleeding and assess their level of consciousness." However, Jessica seemed paralyzed by the seriousness of the situation, standing still without moving. My voice grew firmer as I insisted, "Jessica, do you understand what I'm saying? Please respond quickly." Her voice had a hint of tension as Jessica replied, "Ah, yes. What should I do?" Her panic was evident, and instead of helping, it seemed to add to the confusion at the scene. I rebuked Jessica firmly yet patiently. "Don't you know what to do in an emergency? I doubt you're even a surgeon." Jessica responded with an attitude that could be perceived as anger, saying, "That's not true. There's nothing I can't do." However, her actions, though active, clearly lacked effective measures, and she was just bustling about the scene. I then looked to John. "John, could you measure that elderly person's blood pressure and make sure there's no bleeding?" I gave the orders with composure. John promptly replied, "Understood," and began to prepare for controlling the situation. The accident scene began to regain some order with a swift response from me and Jan. John spoke to Jessica with an unusual sternness. "Jessica, come over here and help," he directed. Jessica complained. "What do you mean? A nurse asking for such a thing?" But John cut her off. "This is no place for someone who can't do anything. If you're not going to be of help in this critical moment where lives are at stake, please step back," he said decisively. Jessica was at a loss for words and stepped back from the scene silently. John reviewed the situation and reported to me, "The vitals are stable, but there might be internal damage. We should conduct a thorough examination as soon as possible." As professionals, they demonstrated readiness to collaborate with other medical staff around them, doing their best for the patients. I directed the response with a steady demeanor. "Let's begin the procedures then. The driver over there seems to be disoriented, but I don't see any serious symptoms. Let's move him out of here." I then turned to Jessica. "Could you please call an ambulance on your cell phone?" Despite my words, Jessica stood frozen, unable to move. I addressed Jessica with suspicion. "Jessica, I'm speaking to you. Do you hear me?" Jessica seemed confused, hesitatingly murmuring, What's the number for the ambulance again?" Jan intervened. "Just give me that phone." He stepped in and took over, arranging for the ambulance. About 5 minutes later, police and fire department personnel arrived, and the once chaotic accident scene started to be sorted out gradually. People gathered, including doctors, department heads, medical students, and even professors. But without being disturbed by this, I spoke to Jessica with calm and stern emphasis on the gravity of the situation. "To be frank, Jessica, your actions earlier were more of a hindrance than a help. What exactly can you say you've accomplished?" I posed the direct question. Jessica was silent, unable to answer. In the medical field, every minute, every second can determine the outcome. This is not a place to protect your ego. Jessica's voice was barely audible as she apologized, "I'm sorry." The crowd at the accident scene quietly observed their exchange, and the director himself was also present. Jessica just seemed out of place and embarrassed. I continued, addressing Jessica, "You've looked down on Jan as just a nurse, but the fact is your positions are different. There's no meaning in comparing you and John. He is one of the most competent nurses in this hospital. Can't you see now how powerless and insufficient your actions were in this situation?" I confronted Jessica with the truth. Jessica retorted somewhat stubbornly, "If I had more experience in emergency situations, I could handle it perfectly well." But John sensed the uncertainty behind her words and calmly exposed her vanity. "You're always driven by a desire to have your accomplishments recognized. However, contrary to the superficial appraisal, your actual skills in the field are still immature. You've just demonstrated that fact yourself," he asserted. He continued, adding insult to injury. "You say you'll gain experience in emergency treatment in the future, but this moment is also a practical situation. Given your current state, it's unlikely you'll have further opportunities to experience the field in the future." Jessica's confidence began to show cracks, and she seemed on the verge of tears, conscious of the surrounding eyes. Yet, the medical field, dealing with lives, demands proper judgment and strictness. Therefore, I had to convey a decision that would impact Jessica's future. "Jessica, I regret to say this, but your name will be removed from the Overseas Training Program candidate list," I declared. Jessica was taken aback. I looked to the director for confirmation. "Father, this decision is acceptable, correct?" The director nodded deeply. "No problem. This incident has given me a clear understanding of her. We have always selected trainees based on their grades, but it may be necessary to reconsider our selection system in light of this." His quiet but firm response marked a moment that signified a complete defeat for Jessica. With a calm but resolute voice, I advised Jessica, "It's important for you to relearn from the basics. Only then will you have the right to compete at the same level as John. Also, take to heart the dangers of judging a person's worth by their appearance. While I considered letting you go from the workplace, I have decided to give you one more chance, the last chance. Make the most of this opportunity and show us your full effort," I advised Jessica, sternly yet justly. Afterward, they quietly left the scene, but the looks from the doctors around Jessica were cold, filled with disappointment and disapproval. Their evaluation of her future was seemingly already set. Weeks passed, and the long-awaited departure day for the overseas training arrived. Jen and I headed to the airport, excited to acquire new knowledge and experience. As for Jessica, I had heard that she resigned from the hospital just a month after the incident. She couldn't endure the cold stares of those around her and ultimately chose to prioritize her pride. Personally, I thought that it was for the best. A doctor who puts pride at the forefront doesn't deserve to hold patients' lives in their hands, and no one would want to entrust their life to such a person. On the way to the airport, I spoke to John with words filled with hope. "John, let's use our abilities to turn this hospital into one of the most renowned places in the world." Jen, sharing that passion and reaffirming his determination, replied, "That's right. I need to work even harder and obtain my medical license as soon as possible." And so I quietly vowed to myself once more my unwavering resolve as a doctor to fulfill my duties.
Thinking you're so important just because of $300. I don't care about such a small amount of money. Chuckling, my son and his wife looked down on me, hurling harsh words. I've been helping them for 10 years since they told me they were struggling financially. Even though they never found steady jobs, I held my tongue and tried to find ways to support them. And what do I get in return? Why did I bother helping them in the first place? I thought someday they would appreciate my efforts and soften their attitude, but that day never came. Isn't it clear now? I can't help but feel angry at them for laughing it off, saying it's not enough or just pennies after I've dedicated 10 years of my time and savings to them. I have devoted myself silently to my son and his wife, but today that changes. My name is Mary, a homemaker in my 50s. Since my husband passed away, I've been living alone. We have a son who moved out after college and now has a family nearby. Though our relationship isn't great, they've been a bit troublesome. After college, my son got a job where he met his wife, who became a full-time homemaker after they married. However, less than a year later, my son quit his job due to issues with his boss, assuming he'd easily find another. But things didn't go as planned. Despite searching, he struggled to find suitable work and eventually gave up altogether. His wife didn't show interest in working either, and within months they faced financial difficulties. To help them, I began sending them a modest $300 each month. They were grateful and thanked me for the support. Every day, I hoped they would overcome their difficulties and become self-sufficient. But now, after 10 years, my monthly $300 isn't appreciated anymore. It's something they feel entitled to receive. For example, one busy month filled with family events, I couldn't find time to meet my son and his wife on the usual day. I give them their monthly money. Late that night, I heard loud knocks on the door. It was my son and his wife. "Mom, we need the money on time. Are you starting to forget things because you're getting older?" My son teased. Tired and sleepy from a hectic few days, I replied, "I'll give it to you another time. Please go home for now." Then his wife, her face red with anger, said, "This happens every month. You have to give it on time. Just because you're my husband's mother doesn't mean you can behave like this." And she grabbed me by the collar. Shocked by the sudden confrontation, I reluctantly handed over the $300 to my son and his wife, which I had prepared earlier. "If you had just given it to us in the first place, this wouldn't have happened. I don't want to resort to physical force with you either," his wife continued. "You should listen to us and behave. Remember, if you ever lose your mind, we'll be the ones taking care of you. It wouldn't hurt to stay on our good side, right?" Their audacity infuriated me, but I feared that challenging them might cause them to depend on me even more, much like when my son quit his job. So, swallowing my anger, I smiled, apologized, and did as they demanded. Looking back, I realized I should have stood up for myself then, but my overwhelming desire for them to become self-sufficient left me feeling powerless. The unpleasant memories with them weren't just confined to that day. I received a call from a concerned neighbor. "Mary, can we discuss your son and his wife?" "Oh dear," I apologized. "I'll be right there." Apparently, when the neighbor returned from shopping, she noticed signs of a break-in at her place. After checking the security footage, she was shocked to see that the culprits were actually my son and his wife. Although her home was ransacked, nothing appeared to be stolen. Knowing about my strained relationship with them, she chose to contact me first. I left work early and reached out to my son and his wife. Together, we visited the neighbor to apologize. "I'm truly sorry," I kept repeating, but my son and his wife didn't seem remorseful. The neighbor seemed displeased, but things settled down after I agreed to cover the costs of the broken window. However, on the way back home, they said something shocking. "Why are older people so uptight? We just needed to borrow a few things," they remarked. I was so taken aback that all I could manage was, "Like what?" They continued, not even looking at me. "Sure, we broke a window and made a mess, but we didn't steal anything. Isn't she overreacting?" My son simply nodded in agreement. I couldn't comprehend what they were saying and remained silent the entire journey. Watching everything unfold, I should have found the courage to speak up to them instead of being afraid. My silence only showed my weakness. After that incident, I noticed their behavior becoming more aggressive. Thankfully, aside from the neighbor incident, they didn't cause major problems. So I continued to help them, hoping they would become self-sufficient one day. Whenever they asked for something, I bought it if I could afford it. My son wanted gadgets to socialize, while his wife desired luxury items to feel on par with others. Their demands kept growing, and they increasingly relied on me for everything. Even on my days off, they'd call me over for household chores. I worked tirelessly. They wanted more than just money. They lacked the means and motivation to earn for themselves. Thus, I felt obligated to support them. Despite my exhaustion, I remained dedicated to my job and fulfilled their requests, which left me drained. I developed dark circles under my eyes, my skin became rough, and dizziness became a regular issue. My son and his wife mocked me, saying, "You look like a mess. And his wife even pointed at me, saying, "She's given up on herself." I didn't have the energy to defend myself against their hurtful words. Deep down, I knew I was reaching my limit, but I felt if I stopped working and helping them, everything would fall apart for all of us. So, despite my exhaustion, I kept pushing myself, determined to hold everything together. Honestly, I had wanted to lean on someone and give up a long time ago. One day, while I was doing chores at my son's house, a small incident sparked an argument. I was already stressed and tired, so every little thing they did annoyed me. His wife then made a cutting remark, saying, "You act like $300 is such a big deal." My son, influenced by her words, added, "We don't need that messy amount," and handed back the $300 I had given them that day. They scoffed, saying, "If you're going to give us money, bring a decent amount," mocking and looking down on me. Those words sparked something inside me. "Fine then," I blurted out, "I'll stop. I won't think about the future or your feelings anymore." They both looked puzzled as I began packing my things to leave, but soon they burst out laughing. "Come on, Mom, quit playing around. If we left you, you'd be all alone. You wouldn't have the courage to live without your precious son and his wife," my son mocked. "Mary, since when did you become such a joker? That wasn't funny at all. You had me worry for a moment there," his wife chimed in. They thought I was just venting frustration and not serious about ending the financial support. They continued to mock me. "If you've got the courage, go ahead and leave," they challenged. "But if you do, we'll cut ties with you. Think you can handle being all alone? You'll regret those words soon enough. Your stubborn mom could never do something like that, right?" I felt completely cornered by their words, yet they continued to treat me poorly. I started questioning what I was gaining from supporting them. Buying them things they wanted, doing their chores. Wasn't I just being used and taken advantage of? It felt like they were exploiting my kindness, treating me like a servant even when I was at my breaking point. They might be family by blood, but their behavior made it hard to see them that way. "I'm serious. Remember that you asked for this," I asserted, but they just laughed it off, treating my words like a joke. "Go ahead and try, but you'll regret it soon. I can already see it." My son's words ignited a fierce determination within me. "I'm not going to take this lying down. I'll make them realize how much they've underestimated me and how wrong it is to treat me this way." As I packed up to leave their house, all I could think about was how I would stand up for myself. First things first, I cut off all the support I had been providing to my son and his wife, just as I had promised. No more money, no more financial aid, and no more helping out around their house. Nothing. From my perspective, I had always lived for the sake of my son and his wife, prioritizing their needs over my own. Taking action without considering them was new to me. Now, I could take a break without worrying about them. I could spend my money on myself and do chores just for my own satisfaction. Experiencing this newfound freedom was truly wonderful. My son and his wife believed I would never cut ties with them and live independently. But in reality, the independence I had yearned for over a decade was exactly what I achieved. Moreover, I decided to exert more pressure on them. I had leased the apartment they lived in after they were evicted from their previous place due to financial difficulties. Naturally, I was also the one paying the rent. Since I had decided to stop supporting them entirely, it didn't make sense to continue paying their rent. Therefore, I contacted the real estate manager and terminated the lease. The manager, who understood our situation, cooperated with me. They were given a month's notice to vacate the apartment, with the understanding that if they didn't comply, formal action would be taken. That night, I sent a text to my son and his wife, informing them that if they didn't move out of the apartment within a month, it would become a serious matter. They read the message right away, and within minutes, my phone started ringing. "Mom, what the hell is this? Where are we supposed to go?" My son shouted as soon as I answered. I could hear his wife panicking in the background. "You may have forgotten, but I was the one paying for that apartment. I told you I was stopping all support, didn't I? So, canceling the lease was the next step." I replied calmly. "We never agreed to that. You said you'd stop sending money, but we assumed everything else would continue," my son protested. I chuckled at his naive expectation. "Really? While you speak so harshly to me, you thought you could still rely on my support for everything else, except the allowance? It's astonishing to see how naive my son and his wife can be. I had let them treat me however they pleased for too long. Even when I expressed my discomfort, I always gave in to their demands, financially and with my time. It was somewhat selfish of me, hoping they would eventually become independent. But I was mistaken. They were the type to take advantage of my generosity as much as they were pampered by it. In hindsight, I should have clearly asserted my position and made them understand. I was the one providing allowance, offering financial support beyond that, and taking care of their household chores. However they look at it, I held the upper hand, and they should have shown gratitude and respect towards me. Instead, they treated me with utter disrespect, like a servant, a mere tool, an ATM to be used at their convenience. To make matters worse, they even laughed at me. When I was at my wit's end, why did I exert myself so much for such an unreasonable couple? Even when they treated me unfairly, I remained silent and let them have their way. Despite all I did for them, they never appreciated my efforts. They only took advantage of me. It wasn't until I reached my breaking point that I realized how selfish and dismissive they truly are, and how they never truly saw me as family. They may have viewed me as a resource, but never as family, not even a little bit. Why didn't I see this sooner? Why did I keep giving my all until I felt completely overwhelmed? Why did I continue believing in them? Looking back, I realized how pitiful my past actions were. I tirelessly supported them, hoping they would eventually become self-sufficient, but all my efforts seemed to count for nothing. As I reflect on the past, my anger towards them intensifies. I feel the need to confront them and demand accountability. I won't be satisfied until they acknowledge their mistakes and apologize. Fueled by these emotions, I spoke up again. I'm going to stop the allowance but continue with the other support. What do you think? I asked them. That's not going to happen, my son tried to interject, but I cut him off firmly. No buts. You understand me. Your lives have always relied on me. If you ever upset me or if I decide not to help you one day, you'd be in trouble. Fortunately for you, I've been naive enough to keep hoping that maybe someday you'll become independent, that perhaps you won't need me to get by. That's right, Mom is kind. That's why you're not really going to abandon us, right? You just said those things in the heat of the moment and now you can't take them back. So you're doing this, right? It's okay, we forgive you. Let's try to be a family again, okay? My son pleaded. Don't be foolish. I've finally seen things clearly. Despite all the support, you two don't even want to be independent, do you? You just want to keep living comfortably on my dime, don't you? I retorted firmly. Trying to explain himself, my son backpedaled. That's not it. We did want to be independent, but we couldn't. We haven't even been looking for jobs. My wife feels the same. We tried in our own way, but it's been impossible. Almost laughing at his response, I couldn't believe their audacity to claim they had tried their best in their own way. I had been observing my son and his wife closely for years. Neither of them seemed to put any effort into finding jobs or living frugally. Instead, they were comfortably living off me every single day. How could they possibly say they had tried their best? Listen, Mom, we're really grateful for everything you've done. We can't even express it in words, but you've always gone above and beyond for us. We know we depend on you to live, and we'd be lost without you. So why don't we start over? You need us too, right? My son pleaded. Are you kidding me? I don't need you, I responded bluntly. On one hand, there's a guy who's still stuck on some trouble from 10 years ago, never holding down a steady job and just being lazy. And on the other hand, there's a woman acting like a stay-at-home wife, never supporting or pushing her husband, just doing as she pleases. You think I need people like you too? You couldn't be more wrong. Do you have any idea how much I've endured because of you two? Day in and day out, I work to make money for you, and even when I'm not working, I'm doing chores for you. It's been incredibly tough, and I finally come to realize that. After all that, I'm not naive enough to want to be family with you too. Don't say such harsh things, Mom. We need you, my son insisted. Without someone like you supporting us all the time, we'd... Despite my words, my son continued to argue from his perspective, disregarding mine. As I pondered what to do next, I suddenly heard a voice shout, "Give me that." Then his wife took the phone. Mary, honestly, I've been frustrated with my husband's selfish behavior too. Most men go out, work, and support their family, but he just wanders around, not working. For my sake, I regret marrying him every day. I feel just as hurt as you do. I'm a victim too. Please help me. Even if it's just me, I can't do this without you. After making her shocking plea to abandon her husband to save herself, his wife continued, "I'll do anything you need me to do, whether it's housekeeping or anything else. Use me however you want. Please, Mary, don't abandon me." Her words left me stunned, and I could hear the couple arguing loudly over the phone, each trying to assert control of the conversation. Annoyed by the chaos, I frowned, and suddenly, it seemed the phone was knocked out of hand and the call disconnected. Days passed without a call back from them. It turned out their relationship had deteriorated significantly after that incident, leading them to decide on divorce and go their separate ways. They blamed each other and even fought over money, prolonging the dispute until their divorce was finalized. After the divorce, both of them tried reaching out to me, but by then, I had already blocked their numbers, so I never heard from them again. My son took on a factory job, working day and night just to make ends meet. Meanwhile, his ex-wife tearfully returned to her parents' home and confessed everything. They reprimanded her harshly. She came to apologize, accompanied by her parents, but she was crying so much that I couldn't make out her words. Since then, I've been living for myself. For a decade, I had been tied down by their needs and never had a moment to focus on myself. Embracing a life centered around my own needs felt incredibly refreshing and liberating. Although I ended up alone without them, I found solace in it. I'm uncertain about the future. There may come a time when I won't have the luxury to live solely for myself. But for now, I believe I deserve to prioritize my own happiness. My name is Layla, and I was born in a quiet suburban town to my wonderful parents, Logan and Madison. My father worked for a local news channel, while my mother cleaned at the hospital. Though we weren't wealthy, our home was filled with love and contentment. Life moved along smoothly until I turned 14, when everything shifted in an instant. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when my parents were out at a dinner party, leaving me at home with my grandmother. I was lost in a cartoon when the phone rang, its shrill tone piercing the air. I'll never forget the cold shiver that ran through me as I heard my grandmother sobbing quietly in the kitchen. In the days that followed, confusion and sorrow blurred everything. My mother had died instantly in a car accident, and although my father survived, he was gravely injured, his legs permanently impaired. As he lay frail and broken in the hospital, my father whispered apologies, his voice thick with emotion. As a child, I couldn't understand his guilt. It wasn't his fault. An irresponsible drunk driver was to blame. But as I grew older, I came to realize that his apologies were not for the accident itself, but for the hardships we would now face and the profound changes in our lives. Still, my father's spirit was unbreakable. Once home and adjusting to life in a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work as a search marketing specialist for the city's major newspaper. His writing abilities remained as sharp as ever, unaffected by his physical limitations. As a teenager, I found strength in our close bond. We shared a love for classic films and lively debates over literature. He supported me through my academic challenges, and when it was time to head to college, he encouraged me to embrace new experiences at State University, where I chose to study forensic accounting. It was there I met Lucy, who quickly became my best friend. Through her, I met her second cousin, Aiden. He was compassionate and quick-witted with a sharp mind that matched my own. He accepted my family's situation without hesitation, and when he met my father, they bonded instantly over their mutual love of classic rock. Aiden's respect for how I managed my life and responsibilities filled me with quiet pride. College passed in a blur, and after graduation, life began to settle into place. I landed a job as a tax manager, while Aiden became a commercial driver. Our relationship flourished, and 4 years later, Aiden proposed in the same park where we had shared our first date. Beneath the canopy of autumn leaves, I said yes with one important condition, that I could not leave my father, who still needed my care. Aiden, with a reassuring smile, accepted without hesitation, sealing our future with love and understanding. In sharing this story, it's clear that life's unpredictability can tear apart everything we know, but it can also stitch things back together in surprising, beautiful ways. Our current arrangement may have been unconventional, but I wouldn't change it for anything. We all live together quite comfortably now. My father's apartment is spacious enough for the 5 of us. Our wedding was intimate and beautiful. Despite being in a wheelchair, Dad insisted on rolling down the aisle to give me away. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as I held Aiden's hand, feeling like I was living in a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its challenges, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Natalie, and my sister-in-law, Ruby. From the start, it was clear they disapproved of me. During our first meeting, Natalie had asked, her face twisting in distaste, "So, your father is handicapped?" I corrected her calmly. "He's disabled, but he works as a search marketing specialist." "Oh," she said dismissively, clearly uninterested. "How nice." Her indifference stunned, but it wasn't as hurtful as when she later turned to Aiden and asked, "Are you sure about this? There are plenty of nice girls from reputable families." I felt a rush of indignation, but Aiden immediately stepped in. "Mom, Layla comes from a fine family too. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." His words quieted Natalie for the moment, but I could see her disapproval still lingering in her eyes. Ruby, following her mother's lead, was just as distant. After the wedding, Aiden moved in with Dad and me. We settled into a comfortable routine. I worked at the tax office, and Aiden spent days on the road. When he was home, we enjoyed meals together, but whenever Natalie and Ruby visited, the atmosphere in our home shifted. They paraded around as if they owned the place, barely acknowledging my father. Once I overheard Natalie whisper to Ruby, "It's such a pity Aiden ended up with her and her crippled father. What if they have kids? Can you imagine the genes?" I was livid, but I stayed silent for Aiden's sake. I tried to keep the peace, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. One evening, after another tense visit from Natalie and Ruby, I couldn't hold back my tears. Aiden found me crying in our bedroom. Hey, he comforted me, pulling me close. "What's wrong?" I managed to say through my sobs, "Your mom and sister, they despise me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Aiden's expression hardened. "That's absurd. You and Dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words reassured me, but the tension with Natalie and Ruby remained. Over time, Aiden's trucking business thrived, and he was frequently on the road. I missed him during his absences, but I kept busy with work and spent my evenings with Dad. Then, one crisp autumn night, as I helped Dad into bed, Aiden called, his voice full of excitement. "Lee, I've been thinking," he began. "How would you feel about us buying a townhouse? It would be more accessible for Dad in his wheelchair. He could spend more time outdoors, and you could even have a garden to tend to." The more Aiden spoke about the idea, the more intrigued I became. I glanced at my dad, who was trying not to show he'd been eavesdropping on the conversation. "What do you think, Dad?" I asked, switching the phone to speaker mode. His eyes sparkled with excitement. "A garden sounds wonderful," he confessed, a smile breaking across his face. "And it would make getting outside so much easier." That was the deciding moment. Over the next several weeks, Aiden and I dedicated ourselves to finding a new home. Eventually, we discovered the ideal place, a spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a wheelchair-accessible shower for Dad, and a lovely backyard. Although taking out a mortgage was daunting, our combined incomes and the rent from Dad's previous apartment made it possible. We moved in on a sunny Saturday in spring, and I'll always remember the joy on Dad's face as he wheeled out onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he beamed, his eyes gleaming with gratitude. In the months that followed, we settled in comfortably. I started a small vegetable garden, and Dad spent hours outside, enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. Life felt blissful. Then came our housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, Natalie and Ruby. They arrived late as usual and immediately surveyed everything with barely hidden envy. During the house tour, Natalie's calculating glances became obvious. When we reached the master bedroom, she leaned in with a sly grin. "You know, Layla," she whispered, "this room would be perfect for Aiden and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." I was stunned. "Excuse me," I managed to say, but she continued, undeterred. "Your father isn't well. He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be enough for him." Before I could respond, she strolled out to the patio, where Dad was chatting with guests. To my horror, she grabbed his wheelchair and began pushing him toward the driveway. "Natalie," I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing? If you want him outside, he can stay right here." I was furious and shaken. Thankfully, Aiden heard the commotion and came running, his face flushed with anger. "Mom," he shouted, his tone sharp. "What are you doing? Let go of Logan's chair now." Natalie looked taken aback by his sternness. "But honey, I don't want to hear it." Aiden cut her off. You and Ruby need to leave. Now, after they left, Aiden apologized deeply to both Dad and me. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I had no idea she'd go this far. Dad reached out, patting Aiden's hand gently. It's not your fault, son. Some people just don't understand what's important. Life gradually found a new rhythm after the housewarming debacle. Natalie and Ruby kept their distance, which was fine by me. Aiden threw himself into his work, taking on longer hauls to help us manage our new mortgage commitments. It was a challenging time, but it ultimately brought us closer as a family, fortified by resilience and understanding. Balancing my role at the tax office with caring for our home and Dad, the years passed seamlessly. Though Aiden was frequently away, his presence at home always brought us joy. My father's health remained stable, and he enjoyed his days gardening or editing from his workspace at home. Then, one fateful day at work, my phone rang. A chill ran through me as the caller introduced himself as Officer Rodriguez from the Highway Patrol. His words washed over me like cold water as he delivered the heart-wrenching news of Aiden's severe accident. The details of the head-on collision blurred together, the gravity of his words not fully hitting until after the call ended. When reality finally set in, I was left with an emptiness I'd never known. Aiden was no longer with us. The following week passed in a haze of grief and arrangements, carried out in a numb state as I struggled to process the weight of the loss. I knew it was crucial to personally inform Natalie, Aiden's mother, about the tragedy. When I called, her initial sharp tone quickly twisted into harsh accusations, blaming me for Aiden's accident. She claimed his demanding work schedule was my fault, her words leaving me stunned and devastated. She ended the call abruptly, leaving me in tears. Aiden's funeral took place on a gray, drizzly day that mirrored the somber mood. Though his mother and sister were notably absent, the community's heartfelt turnout showed how respected and loved he was. My father stood beside me, offering quiet strength as we braved the sadness together. When we returned home, something felt off. The lights were on, and I could hear movement inside. A bizarre sight, especially since I had double-checked that everything was off before leaving. Fearing a break-in on this already heavy day, I cautiously approached with my father. But as we stepped inside, the voices sounded strangely familiar, revealing a shocking twist. In the living room, I found Natalie and Ruby, surrounded by boxes and scattered furniture. What on earth is going on? I asked, confusion briefly breaking through my sorrow. Natalie looked up, her expression a mockery of sympathy. Oh, Leila, dear, she said smoothly, we're just helping you pack. After all, you can't afford to stay here now that Aiden's gone. I was too stunned to respond at first. Ruby chimed in with a saccharine smile. Don't worry, you can move back into your dad's apartment. It's nice and cozy. A surge of anger rose within me. Get out, I said quietly but firmly, holding back the flood of emotions. Get out of my house, now. Natalie looked genuinely surprised. This house is ours now, along with all of Aiden's things. We're his family, after all. I held her gaze, defiant. Funny, you didn't seem like family today at his funeral. Oh, that's right, you weren't there. Natalie waved my words away dismissively. We had other things to take care of. Now, be a good girl and start packing. We need this cleared out by tomorrow. The audacity left me speechless for a moment. They hadn't warned him, hadn't even shown up to honor him, yet they felt entitled to everything we'd built together. I'm calling the police, I said, reaching for my phone. Natalie and Ruby exchanged a glance, clearly unprepared for resistance. Layla, Natalie began, but I cut her off. You have 5 minutes to leave before I call the cops. This is my home. Aiden and I bought it together, and you have no right to be here. My voice was unwavering, and something in my tone must have struck a nerve as they slowly gathered their belongings. Still, Natalie couldn't resist a final threat as they left. This isn't over, Layla. Expect a call from our lawyers. The following days were a whirlwind of grief, anxiety, and endless paperwork as I began sorting through Aiden's affairs, wary of Natalie and Ruby's next move. About a week later, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered, fearing it was the beginning of Natalie's legal threats. Mrs. Aiden, a professional voice asked. This is Anthony from Anthony & Partners. I'm calling regarding your late husband's will. A will? I whispered, taken aback. Aiden had never mentioned a will. Yes, he came to us 4 months ago, Mr. Anthony continued. He was very clear about his intentions. The next morning, I sat across from Mr. Anthony, anxiously waiting to learn the details of Aiden's will. He offered me his condolences and then opened the file. "As I mentioned, your husband drafted a will," he said, and began to read. "I, Aiden, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Lila." I gasped, tears filling my eyes. Mr. Anthony continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Leila use these resources to care for herself and her father, Logan, whom I have come to love as my own. Even in death, Aiden was protecting us." Mr. Anthony handed me a letter from Aiden, and with trembling hands, I opened it. "My dearest Layla, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and Logan. Please know that you two were the best things that ever happened to me. I drafted this will because I knew the nature of my mother and sister, and I didn't want you to worry. I had to ensure that you and Logan would be safeguarded in case something happened to me. You and Logan are my true family, not them. Take good care of each other, live fully, and remember, I'll always be looking out for you. With all my love, Aiden." I held the letter tightly, my tears flowing freely. My father, by my side, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, tears in his eyes as well. Mr. Anthony allowed us a moment to compose ourselves. Then he informed us that, because of the accident, Aiden's insurance would pay out the full value of his policy. "What does that mean?" I asked, still choked up. Mr. Anthony gave a gentle smile. "It means you'll receive enough money to clear your mortgage and more." As we left the office, a weight lifted from my shoulders. Aiden had indeed taken care of everything. But as we arrived home, I spotted a familiar car nearby. Natalie's sleek sedan. My heart sank. Natalie and Ruby were on our porch, but this time I felt fortified with Aiden's letter in my pocket and his love giving me strength. "Layla," Natalie started, her tone overly sweet, "we need to talk about Aiden's estate." I stood firm. "No, Natalie, we really don't. Aiden left everything to me. It's all legal, and you know why? Because we were his family, not you. Now, please leave. You're trespassing." Natalie was momentarily speechless, and Ruby, looking uneasy, quickly tugged at her arm, urging her to retreat. They left, but I knew they wouldn't give up so easily. In the following weeks, I managed Aiden's affairs, and as promised, the insurance money arrived. It was enough to pay off our mortgage with a bit extra. One afternoon, while sorting through Aiden's things, I discovered a journal in his desk. Inside were his handwritten plans and dreams, including starting a college fund for the children we hope to have. Reading his words, I felt a deep ache for the future we had planned together. That night, I struggled to sleep, haunted by what might have been. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Aiden, smiling and reassuring me that everything would be okay. I awoke with a strange sense of peace, but the following days brought a new, persistent queasiness. At first, I thought it was stress. But soon, a nagging thought crept in. After a week of wondering, I went to the pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test, my hands shaking as I waited for the result. When I finally looked, 2 distinct blue lines confirmed my suspicion. Overwhelmed, I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, a storm of joy, fear, grief, and hope washing over me. My dad knocked, his voice concerned. "Layla, everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my cheeks, and held up the test. "I'm pregnant, Dad." He pulled me into a tight embrace, comforting me with the same tenderness he had shown me when I was a child. "It's okay," he soothed. "You're not alone in this. This baby is a blessing, a part of Aiden that will live on." His words resonated deeply. This child was not only a continuation of my love with Aiden, but also a symbol of new beginnings. My fears started to dissolve, replaced by a newfound strength. "You're right," I said, wiping away my tears. "This baby is a blessing and will be just fine." Dad smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling with affection. "That's my girl. Now, let's get something to eat. You're eating for 2 now." As we went to the kitchen, I felt a renewed sense of hope and purpose. Dad became my rock, constantly encouraging me as we prepared for the baby's arrival. One sunny afternoon, while I was tending the garden we had built together, a familiar car pulled up, breaking the peaceful moment. It was Natalie and Ruby. They approached the porch with expressions of discomfort and desperation. "Layla," Natalie began, her sharp tone now softened by circumstance, "we need to talk. We've hit some hard times. Could we possibly stay in your dad's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet?" Their audacity stunned me, but I remained calm. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible," I said firmly. I don't wish to maintain contact with either of you anymore. Natalie's gaze dropped to my belly, her face twisting with disdain. You're pregnant already, you little? Her words dripped with venom, but I stayed composed, refusing to let her affect me. My personal life is none of your business, I replied calmly. Natalie, realizing she was defeated, huffed in frustration before turning on her heel, pulling Ruby along. As they left, a profound peace washed over me. I had defended my family and upheld my dignity, and I knew, without a doubt, that Aiden would have been proud.
My in-laws were drunk at the wedding, but they didn't care even though people were whispering about them. They started yelling at me. It's too late now that you're married, but if you want to be part of this family, you need to show us you have enough money, they said. Yes, your dad is right, so make sure to give us $1,000 a month as a new bonus, they added. I was shocked by their demands. I couldn't believe they would say such things at my wedding reception. I just stared at them, feeling my face go pale. My dad took the microphone from them. Enough is enough. Don't you realize you're embarrassing yourselves? He said. My name is Linda. I am a 30-year-old office worker. I am currently dating Larry, who is 32 years old. I met him through a friend who was worried about me being single, so she introduced us. After dating for a year, Larry proposed, and now we are about to get married. I lost my mother when I was very young, and my father raised me on his own. He worked very hard to take care of me. I didn't have many worries growing up, but losing my mom, who I loved so much, deeply hurt me. Because of this, I was very careful with my emotions. That's why I hadn't dated anyone seriously since my school days. I even thought it would be okay if I stayed single forever. Then I met Larry. At first, I didn't feel any romantic feelings for him, even though he asked me out many times. Larry really cared about me and was always a gentleman. Slowly, I began to open my heart to him, and we started dating. He kept caring for me, and I felt very happy. He became very special to me, and I started thinking I wanted to be with him forever. Then he proposed, and we decided to get married. Larry understood everything about me and was always kind to me no matter what. Don't worry, if you're ever feeling unsure about something, I'll be here for you until you feel better. I love you, Linda. You can count on me, he would say. His words moved me. He promised to make me happy for the rest of my life. Just being with him warmed my heart. If he cared that much for me, I thought I should do the same for him. When I told my father that we decided to get married, he was so happy that he cried. Wow, Linda, you're finally getting married. I'm so happy for you, he said. Oh, Dad, you're being dramatic, I joked. Wow, I hadn't heard anything like that from you until now. I was always worried that you might never get married, he replied. Oh, really? I had no idea you were worried about that, I said. Well, every father worries about his daughter, you know. Anyway, congratulations, he said. Thanks, Dad, I replied. I was so happy to be congratulated by my dad, who had raised me by himself. I thought I would probably cry at the wedding, and my dad would probably cry even more since he was already crying now. With that, Larry and I started preparing for our wedding. We were both busy with our jobs, so our days were very hectic. We worked during the weekdays and made wedding preparations over the weekends. There was no time to rest. Our calendars were always full. On a rare day off, we were supposed to visit Larry's parents' house. I was going to meet Larry's parents for the first time. Larry had come over to meet my father right after he proposed to me. Originally, I had planned to visit Larry's parents right after that to introduce myself. But they were very busy, and our schedules never matched. Finally, some time passed, and we managed to arrange a visit. As we arrived at his parents' house, I suddenly felt nervous. Don't worry, my parents are very kind, Larry reassured me. His words made me feel a bit better, and I rang the doorbell. It was his mother who opened the door. Mom, I'm home, Larry said. Welcome home, Larry. It's so good of you to come, his mother replied warmly. As she talked with her son, I greeted her as politely as I could. Nice to meet you. My name is Linda, and I'm Larry's fiancée. I see, so you're Linda, she said. Her voice was much lower than when she spoke to Larry, and her smile vanished. She looked me up and down as if judging me.
Then she led us to the living room, where her cold attitude didn't change. Linda, I'm curious about what you bring to the table. Larry is our treasure and our only child. If you're going to marry him, you need to be a suitable wife. Are you worthy of him? She asked, more like an interrogation. I was taken aback by her question. I hadn't expected such a cold attitude from my future mother-in-law and was at a loss for words. You're going to join our family, you know. Are you ready for that? She continued. True, marrying Larry meant joining his family. But it's not like Larry's family were the Kennedys or some well-known high society family. It's not like I was marrying into a royal family. Why was I being asked to make such a commitment? Besides, I wasn't even going to live with them. I don't like being pressured with questions like these. As I was trying to figure out how to respond, his mother seemed impatient with my slow reply and scolded me harshly. When I ask you a question, answer me right away. You're so rude, she snapped. I'm asking if you're ready for this, she continued, raising her voice. Despite feeling overwhelmed, I managed to say, I hope that Larry and I will support each other in our marriage. When I said that, his mother was not convinced. What a naive thing to say. You aren't just going to support each other. You are supposed to support Larry. It's your job as a wife to support your husband. You don't even understand the basics, she criticized. Then Larry's father, who was sitting next to her, intervened. Honey, calm down. Sorry about that, Linda. You must have been startled by my wife's words, he said, trying to ease the tension. It's all right, I replied, trying to remain calm. His mother is very protective of her only son. Maybe she was just nervous and spoke without thinking. Just then, Larry's brother walked in. He spoke in a quiet, calm, and gentle tone. He seemed like a kind man, which gave me a moment of relief, but that relief was short-lived. With a smile on his face, he said the most unexpected thing. What my wife says is actually justified. What concerns me the most is that you come from a single-parent family. What do you mean by that? I asked, confused. Well, being raised by just one parent doesn't have a good public image. We can't be too happy to have such a person become the wife of our only son, can we? He explained. Hold on a minute, I said, unable to let this comment slide. What is wrong with being raised by a single parent? My father worked very hard to raise me by himself. I am very thankful for my upbringing, and I am proud of my father. Being raised by a single parent doesn't make me any less valuable. But they still argued. Since you were missing one parent, you couldn't have learned how to be a good wife, do housework, and such. I responded, I did a lot of housework to help my father. I can also cook pretty well, so please don't say that. Despite my response, Larry's mother ignored what I said and finally stated, I will allow you to marry Larry, but in exchange, you must promise to devote everything to us because we are Larry's parents. Can you promise me that? I was shocked. What? Since you came here to ask for our permission to marry our son, you do know what your duties are, don't you? Before I could say more, he continued the conversation. I found that my in-laws had completely taken over the conversation, giving me little chance to respond. That night, as I thought more about the marriage, I decided to share my feelings with Larry. Say, Larry, do your parents always talk to people like that? What about it? Larry seemed unfazed. I was surprised that Larry didn't see anything wrong with what his parents had said to me. Well, I mean the way your parents spoke to me and what they said, I tried to explain. Oh really? Well, they were just talking about whether you were ready for this marriage. I get that your parents are worried about their son's marriage, but I feel like what your parents were saying was a bit too much. Really? Why is that? My parents didn't say anything wrong. Besides, they've given us permission to get married, so don't worry about it. That's true, but I felt uneasy that Larry seemed to side with his parents more than with me. That was very troubling. I guess he realized I was feeling unsure because he gave me a hug. Linda, you don't have to worry so much. My parents are just a bit upset because their only son is getting married, he said. He spoke as if he didn't fully support me. It's all going to be fine. Don't overthink it. I'm sure they just want what's best for us. They want us to be as good of a couple as they are. That's why they were a bit harsh. Oh really? I replied, like he said maybe his parents have high expectations for us. But even if that's the case, I don't think it's right for them to belittle me because I was raised by my father. I don't think people who say such things make a good couple. We are the ones getting married, and we should be the focus, not their approval or disapproval. With that perspective, Although I was still a bit upset, I decided not to dwell too much on his parents' opinions. Then the day of the wedding arrived. We had many guests, including our relatives, friends, colleagues, and bosses. I walked down the aisle with my father, who had raised me all my life. Larry and I exchanged our vows and rings. We were met with applause, and for the first time, I truly realized that I was getting married to Larry. I felt a happiness I had never felt before. As we walked into the reception hall, we made our way through the crowd, greeted by videos of us as part of the entertainment. It was a joyful time. I chatted with friends I hadn't seen in a while, and many people congratulated us. Despite my earlier worries about his parents, I was glad I had decided to marry Larry. I was glad we decided to have a memorable day. After the ceremony, we planned to officially register our marriage, and Larry and I would become husband and wife. I cherished every moment and felt so happy. Time flew by, and soon it was time for the final part of the event. The bridegroom and both sets of parents lined up to greet the guests. But I started to feel uneasy because of Larry's parents. We were all supposed to be standing in line,